Hi everyone, welcome to DIY Reports training with Community Legal Centres Australia. My name is Oliver and I'm going to be running through the training today. You can probably see on the screen some little instructions about how your control panel works. Before we get started into a little bit of housekeeping, I thought we should start with an acknowledgement of country. I'd just like to acknowledge that I am coming to you today from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and that land, indeed all Aboriginal land, has never been ceded. And I want to pay my respects to any Indigenous peoples in the training today. And acknowledge the importance of placing Indigenous peoples first in all community legal work. If anyone would like to acknowledge the country that they're joining us from today in the chat, you're more than welcome to do that. Today we are here for some training on Drilldown and DIY Reports. I recognize a bunch of the names in the attendees list, so hopefully you know why you're here, you know what you've signed up for, and some of you maybe even are following on from standard reports training last week. So welcome. I hope you get something useful out of this. Should start quickly with a little bit of housekeeping. If you've got questions, feel free to put them in the chat or the questions box, and my two assistant facilitators today, Alex and Ruben, will be able to respond to them. Alex, if you'd like to introduce yourself first quickly.
Hi, I'm Alex. You should all know me. I facilitate quite a lot of these. But if you have any questions, please do feel free to pop them in the questions box, and I will happily do my best to answer them for you, along with Ruben, who I'm going to pass to right now.
Hello, my name is Ruben. My pronouns are they, them. I work in the ICT team as well as Ollie. You may have dealt with me on help desk, maybe not so much frequently recently. But yes, I am here to provide additional expertise and help answer your questions as you go, if they might be easy questions. Otherwise, pass them up to Ollie, who will do an excellent job of explaining them for you.
Wonderful, thank you both. Okay, cool. So basically, a quick explanation of what Drilldown and DIY reports are. They're basically more detailed ways of getting information out of class. If you know about standard reports, you know they come with some pre-built fields and options and things that they will allow you, information that will allow you to extract or not extract. Drilldown and DIY reports give you a little bit more flexibility. You have a little bit more control over how they function and what kind of data you get out. I thought we would start with a really quick poll. So that will pop up on the screen for you, hopefully now, and I'll give you a couple of moments to answer.
It's good to see some of you live and breathe pivot grilled field list.
All right. I think pretty much everyone's voted, so let's keep going. It's good to see we've got like a mix of skill levels here. So as I'm going along, if you feel like I'm going too fast or too slow or covering what you're looking for or not covering what you're looking for, please let me know in the chat. All right, cool. So
we actually already have one question that we will get to. Medina, what is pivot grid field list? When we get to the actual reports, all will be explained.
Yeah, sorry, I put that option in there as a bit of a joke because I find it quite funny. So sorry to confuse you early on. It all will be revealed in time. So this is just a little bit of overview of what we're going to go through today. A little bit of an introduction to Drilldown and DIY. I'll walk you through Drilldown and DIY reports, how to make them, set them up, and then save and share. And then Ruben is going to talk a little bit about some ways to tell stories with data. that you might find useful for your centers. Then finally, we'll go through documentation and getting help. Cool. So without further ado, so there are 3 types of reports in class. I've kind of covered this already. There's the standard reports that you will have already been introduced to, your SO1s, your CO3s. Actually, we might even start this by getting a little list up. If you go to the reports section of class, so you can see here under format, you've got your CO3s, your S10.2s, all are standard reports. But if you scroll all the way down, you'll see there's these 5 little reports down the bottom here called with Drilldown as the type, and they're again, this step towards a little bit more granular data that you can extract, play with, and shape to your own desires. So I thought we would start by having a look at NO 3.1 services by law type today. So let's open this up. If this ever loads.
We might be having a bit of a technology issue in the office. I do apologize for that.
Sorry about this. That's more like what we like to see. Okay, so the first thing you'll notice if you've done any kind of looking at standard reports before, is that the filter panel on the side is very similar. It's got a start date and end date, it's got funding categories, and it's got this little demographic field here. So why don't we start by just popping in some numbers. And so funding categories, I'm just going to grab everything, keep it nice and simple. And then if you click on demographic, you'll see there's 2 options here. There's for financial disadvantage and family violence indicator. And if you click on the drop down, you'll see there's options for any yes or no. It's probably worth noting just briefly here that yes on these options counts for both yes and at risk of. We'll look at that in a little bit more detail as we go along. So if you come over here onto the actual report page itself, you'll see this has been pre-populated with some fields here. You've got law type, you've got problem type. Over the top here, you've got service type, and you've got this little box here called NO of service. So these are fields that have been pulled in specifically, pulled in to populate this report. And if you just hit load, it will load these up for you automatically. Cool. So this gives you a report that's got problem law types broken down into problem types, and then over this side broken up into the different numbers of into the numbers for the different service types. And if you scroll down, you go see criminal and family and legal system and getting help. You might notice something a little bit weird here. You'll see referral. We've got here like 1.20, 8.70. You might be thinking, what on earth does that mean? How can you have 0.7 of something? Basically, this is to do with how referrals and only referrals are counted in class in the DIY reports, and that is when you have a referral to, say, a client comes in and they receive a referral to 3 different services. Each of those services will be counted as 0.33 of a referral, which is how you end up with strange and unusual numbers. It's only referrals that are treated that way. Just a unique quirk. So now we've got all of the services for this time period. Let's break up the demographic a little bit. So let's have a look at just family violence indicator set to yes, and we're going to load that report. And you can see here, this is just showing us all of the services that have a family violence indicator set to yes or at risk of. I'm going to start. This is like a transitional moment between drill down reports and DIY reports. That basically they have something in common in the architecture of how they've been set up that I'm going to show you here, and then we're going to apply it in a DIY report a little bit further on. So to bring up something called the pivot grid field list, which we mentioned earlier, there's two ways you can do this. You can do it by right-clicking in any of this white space up the top here and clicking show field list, and you'll see this blank box comes up. Or if you click on customize up the top, it does the same thing. So there's nothing in this, which is not very exciting right now, but I promise will be more exciting in the future. Basically, this is a little container of all of the fields that it's possible to bring into the report that you're looking at. For NO 3.1, the only things you can bring in are law type, problem type, service type, and number of service. So at the moment, there's nothing available. But say, for example, you thought this was too much detail, you don't want to know about the problem types, you just want to give plain and simple the law types. Well, you can click on problem type and drag that into the pivot grid field list. And there we go. It's taken it out of the table completely, and you can see it's in here from the list of things that's available to choose from. So that just shows you really neatly and cleanly the raw numbers, how many service types by each law type. Cool. I'm just going to talk really briefly about the other drill down reports because I think we've covered this one pretty completely, which is that you've got services by law type, projects by law type, project services, and number of problem types by law type. They all kind of count the same law type, problem type issues. And then you've got this one up here, PT01, top 20 problem types. That just gives you a straightforward list of the top 20 problem types. So if that's something you're interested in for your center, it's not a particularly nuanced piece of information, but it does give you some fast and hard numbers. So there's only 5 of these drill down reports, and after that, beyond that, rather, we get into DIY report territory. So let's jump on into that. So the easiest way to get to DIY reports is to just type DIY into the display name, and as you can see, I've searched it about 4 million times, and you'll come up with a list of all the DIY reports. If you look at the names, see they're all called different things. Some of them, these ones here I've created and will probably not be in your list. But things like DIY service documents, DIY project documents should be pretty easy to find. So basically, each DIY report is set up to pull in fields from different parts of class, and the combination of fields that you can see is determined by the parts of class that it's pulled in from. That might not be totally obvious to you looking at the name, but if you open up and play around, you can get a bit of a sense of what kind of things you can do with which of these reports. It's not always straightforward, and it's sometimes quite confusing, but I'm going to make your life really easy right now and tell you that probably 95% of the time, the report you're going to be looking for is DIY service client. That pulls in information from the service field, the service record, and the client record. So if you want to report on anything that involves either of those two things, this is probably the place you're looking for. So let's open up DIY service client and have a bit of a look at what it looks like. Okay, so you can see it looks a little bit like our NO 3.1, except it hasn't been pre-populated with these fields up the top here. So it's got filter panel, again, pretty similar. Let's whack some numbers in. Cool. You can also do things like choose a rolling date range if you wanted to let the computer determine the period of time for you. That's also an option. And then you've got the option for additional reporting dates. So you've got the default is the completed service date, but if you wanted to look at everything that had been opened during a period, you could look at the open date, or if you only wanted to look at things that have been closed, you could look at the close date. All open ongoing pulls every open service in your center from forever. So anything in the system that you have that is still open, this will show you what it is. Okay, so yeah, the reporting date you will find most helpful is really dependent on exactly what you're looking for. But in terms of if you're trying to mirror things that you see in standard reports, those all use service date completed service. So you maybe keep that in mind if you have any questions about your data consistency. Okay, so funding category, again, I'm just going to grab everything, keep it nice and simple. And so you've got two options here. One is for include custom fields, which I am going to check. Basically, any custom fields that you've built in class, if you want to see them in a DIY report, you need to check that box, otherwise they will not show up. So it's easy to be safe than sorry and give it a check. It does run a little bit slower, but not heaps. Show all dates is a little bit different, and we will get into that a bit further on in the session today. So now we've got this big blank space. What on earth are we going to do with it? Well, thinking about looking at the family violence indicator we were looking at earlier, you could see that, yes, we've got, the number of clients that have a family violence indicator set to yes are at risk of broken down by the law type. But what if you're not interested in the law type? What if you want to know what suburb they're from, for example? If there's particular suburbs that have very high rates of family clients coming in with family domestic violence issues, maybe that's an interesting, something interesting for your center to talk about, reflect on. Maybe you're just curious. So I thought we would start by building a report that could tell you that. So we brought up the pivot grid field list earlier, and we're going to do the same thing again now. Let's have a look at show that field list, and here you can see, come on, there's a whole heap of stuff in here, just so many different things. These are all the fields that you can drag into this report to get some information out of it. There's a whole heap in there, and it's pretty flexible and interesting. But what is really helpful to start, I guess, getting your head around is which combinations of things can tell you useful data and which things just don't really tell you anything at all. So hopefully, if you are playing around with this in your center, you will work those things out. But for today, we're just going to build a few reports and see what things look like and go from there. So to find out about the suburbs of services that have family and domestic violence indicator checked to yes, we're going to start by pulling in some fields from the field list and populating this report. So this list is huge, as we kind of covered already. To search the list, you can use Apple F, or if you're on a Windows keyboard, I think it's Command F, and that bring up a little search bar in your browser, and then you can just type whatever you like in here. So let's start with so client ID, service ID, family violence indicator, and suburb. So the one thing we're missing from this report, now that we've filled in some of the fields we're looking for, is that it's not going to count anything because there's nothing in the data items here. So if I loaded this now, you would just have blank things all the way down the side for grand total. So in order to give this report something to count, you need to put a data item in it. So for the DIY service client, there are two data items possible, and they both start with NO of, and you've got number of client and number of service. You can, whichever one you pop in, that's the thing it will count. We want to look at the services here, so let's drag number of service into the data items. Cool, all right, and then we're just going to load that report. Cool, so we can see here, we've got our client IDs and then our service IDs, we've got family violence indicator and the result, and then we've got the client suburb, and there's heaps of blanks. I and we're using our dummy data site, obviously. So a lot of the data in here is just nonsense that people like me have entered to try and see if things worked or not. So your centers will probably look a lot more healthy in terms of content than this one does. But you can see straight away. So something I thought I would talk about really briefly is grouping. So you can see the example of a client C179. They've got the client ID here and then 3 services all linked to the same one. And then down the bottom, we've got like a little C179 total 3. That's because this client has had 3 services and the service ID is to the right of the client ID. So in this report, everything groups to the left. So the thing on the left hand most side is the thing that everything else will fit itself into. So for example, if I wanted to see this ordered by family violence indicator, I could drag family violence indicator all the way over to the left. And then we would see, well, they're all blank, and then at risk, and there's your clients and your services and your suburb. So you can move this around, to find the data presentation that works best for you. And actually something I should flag in here as well is if you ever, that there's no real right or wrong way to do this. It's totally about what data presentation makes the most sense to you and to your brain. So if you ever contact the help desk and ask one of us to build something for you, and then you get it back and you're like, what on earth is this? How am I supposed to read this? This is nonsense to me. There is no harm in coming back and saying, actually, can someone else have a look at this? Because I think our brains don't work in the same way. It's a very, very valid thing to do. Because again, if you were to come to the help desk and ask 3 different people to build the same report, you would probably get 3 different versions of it that all give you the same data, just in slightly different ways. So now we've got this big old list of services, clients, family violence indicator, client suburb. So we said earlier that we're interested in finding out about the clients that have a family violence indicator set to yes or at risk of. So to filter those down, if you want to grab this little funnel on the side here, it will, once it loads, give you a list of all of the results that are available for that option. So we're only interested in at risk of and no, at risk of and yes. So those are the 2 I'm going to select, and then I'm going to run this again to filter it. And when it finishes loading, you can see this has just now given us the services where those are the answer. Those are the answers, and then you can see the suburbs here. So you can actually filter on any of these. So say, for example, you're only interested in the clients that live in Brisbane City. Okay. And you'll see there's just 1 client with 1 service in Brisbane City for the time period that we talked about. So if you're filtering things, let's take this back to everything. So if you're filtering things and you're finding there's just too many columns in your report, it's too ugly, it's cumbersome, it's in the way, you can actually hide things you're filtering quite easily by dragging them up to where it says drop filter fields here. So that will take it out of your report main and kind of keep it hidden a little bit. So you've got a bit more screen real estate. It tidies things up for you a little bit. So you can see the filter is still on, so it's still only using those 2 responses. And we've got a whole heap more space. You can fit some more things on the screen. So that is the basics of DIY reports. Cool, I think this takes us through to sharing, and then I think Ruben is going to jump in with some information about telling stories with data. So to talk about saving and sharing, because we've got these reports, like now you need to do something with them. So you've got 2 options. So the first one is we're going to save this one because I'm interested in coming back to it. And that will bring up this little box. So you need to, every time you want to save a report, a DIY report you've created, you'll need to name it something. I recommend naming it something that that will tell you what is in it. So for example, we're going to call this FDV indicator by suburb. And then you can add save changes if you'd like. So once you save it and close it, this will change the options you have in this bar up the top here. Cool, so now you can see you've got a whole heap of different options. You've got save, edit, save as, sharing, blah, blah, blah. So firstly, if you want to just export this, you want to see it, as an Excel spreadsheet, you go to the export button and you've got options for Excel or CSV. I usually recommend exporting to CSV, which just opens as an Excel file, but doesn't retain all of the formatting, so it's just a little bit cleaner. And so that's that way you've got it out of class and into your computer, and you can do with that whatever you need to do. If you want to, maybe you want to do some more complicated analysis in Excel, that's also available to you. Or if, say, you made this report and you know that your colleague would really benefit from seeing it and being able to manipulate it to move the data around for themselves, you can share it by going to the sharing screen. So when this loads, there'll be two big lists of things. Yeah, cool. So on the left-hand side here, we've got roles, and on the right-hand side, we've got users. So on the left, you can share, you have the option of sharing this report with everyone of a particular role. Say you think, everyone who is an advanced admin at my center should be able to see this, you can share it with all of them in one go. Or if you just want to share it with a particular person, say Kumba Jana, you can share it with just Kumba. So I feel like I should jump in here with something I should have prefaced this sharing conversation with, which is that by default, once you've created a report for a DIY report for yourself, no one else can see it until you share it. So if you want, anyone else at your center to see it, you will need to actively share it with them. And if you have users who are leaving your center that have DIY reports that they've made that haven't been shared with anyone else, that's something you'll really want to make sure that you share around before you close their account. You've got, as you can see here, a whole bunch of different sharing types. I'll just run through really quickly what they mean. So none means the user can't see the report at all. Locked means you can view it but have no interactivity. Locked with filters means they can filter, like we were doing with the little funnels, but that's the only thing they can do. Unlocked save as means they can save a copy and do whatever they like with it, and unlocked editable is functionally the same thing. They can save a copy and do whatever they like with it. The amount of power you want to give someone is up to you and what you think is right. I find unlocked save as is what I use nearly all of the time. Yeah, that's just a little, that's how you can share things with people. Basically, you just click whatever you want, whatever you've decided is the right way to share, and then hit save and close. And any reports that have been shared with you will be available in your list of reports all the way back here if this mouse wants to cooperate. Yes, here we go. So see, for example, this one created by Samuel Martin, DIY services by assignee has been shared with me at some point in time. Okay, so now that we've saved and shared our report, cool. Shall we move on to telling stories with data? Ruben, if you want to instruct my mouse. I think you're on mute.
I was on mute. Sorry about that. Okay, so I guess when we're talking about telling stories with data, it's about largely what we're interested in is understanding the question that we're trying to ask. So with the data that we have here and maybe a little bit of extra data, I can show that we can actually tell some different kinds of stories with the data that we have here in class. So Ollie's already demonstrated that you can move the fields around to different sections of the report. So say we're less interested in seeing which specific clients and services were experiencing family violence during this period, and we're only interested in just seeing how many experienced family violence per suburb and breaking down that information by the different types of responses. So we actually want to see how many were at risk of versus how many were experiencing family violence. So to do that, we would just simply get rid of the service ID column and the client ID column first. And once that's moved, we can move the family violence indicator from the filter section to the column fields section. And what that's going to do is effectively give us a two-dimensional table. So vertically, we'll have a list of suburbs, and horizontally, we'll have a list of the different responses that you can give to the family violence indicator. And there'll be an intersection of how many services there were at each suburb that had each different response type. So you can see down the bottom, we've got a grand total of 9 for at risk of and 46 for yes. And for each suburb, there's a different response. You'll actually see it's a bit of a weird quirk. The first 2 rows are both blank. You may or may not see 1 or 2 rows of blanks. That's kind of just a weird quirky in terms of how some fields are recorded. Sometimes if you never actually touch the field, it records as like a what they call a null in the database. So there's no data at all. Whereas if you touch the field, it might actually save just like an empty value. So there is text, but it's like a new line or something like that. You might actually even see a third one. You might see one that represents someone's accidentally just typed a space and then tabbed onto the next field. We've talked to our developers, you can't unfortunately put them all into one, but just know that effectively all of those are just where there's nothing meaningful there. But you can see we've got, as we said, a breakdown by suburb of what different types of family violence response or positive family violence response that you can experience or that you can record. What if we, sticking with family violence here, we're talking about stories, we're talking about telling stories over time. So let's say instead of suburb, we were interested in seeing the experience of family violence over a time period in class. So what we can do there is we would remove the suburb, we would move the family violence indicator from the columns to the row fields. This is just my personal preference. I find time-based data seems to work better looking horizontally than vertically. And then we can search for the word month in our field list. Let's start simply with month, and that's going to give us, put it into the columns field. Ollie's already anticipated this. It's almost like we rehearsed this. So that's going to give you a horizontal representation of each month in the time period. It'll break it down by year first, then by month, so you'll always know where in time you sit. It'll obviously order it chronologically, and then you'll get a list of responses for family violence indicator and a row for each of them below. So yeah, you can even take this further. You can group date-based data in this DIY report. So we can grab the year field and then bring it. Let's go for the calendar year for now, just based on the date range that we've got. Drag it before month, and then we'll get a further breakdown where it will break it down into. You can see we've got a slight overlap here. Actually, we do not, because it ends the 1st of January and there were no services on the 1st of January 2021. If we extend that date range out a little bit to say the 30th of January or the 1st of February, that's fine. You'll see that we start getting a breakdown for each year as well as each month. So you get subtotals at each of those levels. So again, there wasn't anything on the 1st of February, but we've got a subtotal for the for January 2021. What's interesting to note here, if we change the what we're counting here from services to clients by removing no of service and adding no of client, what we'll find is if you add up all of the responses on the grand total column on the right side of the report, that it probably won't actually add up to, so you can see 34 plus 9 is only 43, but we've got a grand total of 50. Why is this? So the way that it's counting is it's going for each month, it's saying how many clients had a service where there was a family violence indicator of each type. And so for each response, it's counting the unique number of clients that had that response, a service with that response during that month. So if you add up every single column, January, February, March, all the way up to January 2021, you'll end up with that count of 9. I probably should have used yes as the example because that's probably where they differ. You'll end up with a 34. So you'll end up with something like 41 for yes, whereas it's 34 for the grand total. And that's because during the entire period of time, there were only 34 unique clients who had a service where they'd experienced family violence. They might have experienced. So what this tells us is you have some clients who are experiencing family violence and seeing you for services across multiple months during the year. So it really depends on you on what you want to count. If you only want to see to count what the unique totals are, at the if you want a total count of clients for this period of time, then definitely sum total the grand total on the right hand side. If you're counting services, it doesn't actually matter because they should be unique across the whole spectrum. It's only where you have clients. If you count down the grand total at the bottom, that's where you're going to get that 50 count that's there at the bottom right. Don't ask me why it doesn't do the same thing for counting how many unique. So you might have one client who has 2 services during February 2020, and one they're at risk of family violence, and then the second service they are experiencing family violence. They're going to each count as one unique count in this bottom row. Like I said, don't ask me why it's that way in the horizontal count and not the vertical count. All I want to do is make sure that you are aware that those things are there. And if you have any questions about it, obviously, you can get in touch with us. So I think in general, that's an idea of how you can take one piece of information and tell a few different stories with it. So if you're looking at reporting over multiple calendar years or financial years, you might find if you're a larger centre that class might struggle with getting all of the numbers that you want. If that's a problem, that's going to be, unfortunately, a limitation of class. We are constantly working to make improvements on the reports, and I think by and large they should work for everyone right now. They used to be a lot worse than they are now, but just flagging in advance, if you're trying to get multiple years of data at a time, it might struggle. So our general advice is build the report that you want, test it on a short date range, because it takes a lot less time to load less data. Once you're happy with the design, expand it out to the full date range that you want to expand it to. Yeah, so I think that's in general stories with data. There are some other fancy things that we can do with that. If you attended our standard reports training, Sam would have shown you the basics of heat mapping. So you can kind of apply some of that logic using the DIY reports, but we have standard reports that are meant to give you, most of what you need to use for that. Those are the reports D01, D02, and D03.
Thank you so much, Ruben. Do you want to talk briefly about show all dates?
Yes, thank you for reminding me. So let's change our date range to start from, or what did we want? Let's change our date range from August to October 2020. There will be method to my madness. Don't worry about it. So let's just now click load report and we'll see what happens. So where did at risk go? Because during August, September, and you can see that October has disappeared for yes. So because at risk of had no data during any of the selected months, the row doesn't display. If you click show all dates and then hit load report, at risk of should show up again. Why did it not show up again? Sorry, we tested this beforehand, so let's just drag it back to July. Oh, hang on a sec. Okay, let's drop that filter down. No, okay. Let's bring it back to July and see what happens. So sorry that my very smooth example, so you can see at risk is showing back up again. What it should be doing, so in theory, what show all dates should do is where an entire row or column is 0, show it anyway. I can't tell you why it's not working right now. We'll just have to look into that and make sure that it does work. But yes, you'll have to trust me and say, we did test it before we did this session, it did work. Otherwise, I wouldn't have talked about it right now. So just to recap, the whole point of show all dates is if there are months or values that have nothing in them when you're evaluating by time period, show all dates should force it to show up even if there are zeros. So if we so if you want, basically this is if you want to actually show the entire progression of time, let's get rid of the calendar year and see if that fixes it, Ollie. And then bring us back to August and see. Basically, these reports are built to only show you what we have data for. No, that's not helped. Okay, I'm not going to languish on this anymore. The main point of this is to bring back the data where there's zero so that you can actually see the entire picture across time and across all of the different responses. That is only for time-based analysis. If you don't have any date fields in there, then the show all dates field button won't do anything. And in any case, you'll only see results that you'll only see values that actually have any records recorded during the start date and end date period that you've selected. So without the month field, if you only had yeses in the family violence indicator for a particular start date and end date, if you drop down the family violence indicator field, you wouldn't have anything else to add or remove. And you just have to basically know what the other result types are and know that they didn't have any results during that period. It's not that the reports are broken in that specific situation. It's that there's just no data to display, if that makes sense.
Great. Thank you, Ruben. Okay, cool. So we have like 3 minutes left, but I wanted to really quickly do something that will answer a question from Alice in the chat. And also, this was something that was asked at the training last week that I said I would show you how to do. So hopefully we have just enough time. So this was a question of someone asking if there is a way to look at their actions by assignee. So this is an opportunity to use the report that is not DIY service client. So I eat my words earlier from earlier. But if you just click onto DIY service action, this is where you have an opportunity to count the number of actions. So yep, that's fine. Everything. Let's have a look at some custom fields, and then if we really quickly bring up the pivot list, so we want, let's have action assigned to, and then let's have action notes, and let's have service, service type, and let's count the number of actions. So you see here before we had number of service and number of client, now we've got number of service and number of action. So if you drop number of action into the data items, and then we're going to load this up. And see here, we've got, these are all blank because things in our system so rarely get assigned to people, but we've got Chris Test, Reese Amble, Susan Scott, we've got the service type, and we've got the action notes. As I'm sure you can see, they're extremely interesting. So that is a way to you to just have a look at the number of actions assigned to individual people and seeing what those actions are made of. So really, really quickly to answer Alice's question, if say I wanted to just be looking at the action notes and then for a particular kind of service, you could take out action assigned to, filter on the service type, say we only want to see legal advice, so we're getting rid of everything else. We just want the legal advices. And there you have it. So that's just looking at one particular service type. Okay, we've got about 30 seconds left, so I just want to say thank you to both Alex and Ruben for facilitating today, and thank you to everyone who came. I hope this has been helpful. Please feel free, if you have follow-up questions, to shoot us an email through to the help desk, and hopefully we will be able to answer them for you.
Yes, there were a couple of questions that it looks like we weren't quite able to get to in this session. So yes, feel free to email us icthelp@clcs.org.au and we can help you with those DIY report questions.
Yeah, I can see, sorry, Katie and Sarah, if you send an email, I can show you how to go through both of those. All right, thank you everyone. Have a wonderful evening, afternoon. How do we end this?